Welcome to today's presentation on how to position your time abroad to get the job, sponsored by the Hiatt Career Center at Brandeis University. My name is Alexandra Stevens. I'll be moderating today's discussion with Brandeis alum Claire Gunter, class of '03, who will be sharing both her own experience studying abroad with you and her tips for how to apply this to your job search and career goals. I also wanted to welcome, in addition to the Brandeis students who are on the line today, students from our LACIN consortium as well as the Small College Consortium. So welcome to all of you students, and welcome to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Excellent introduction, and that sort of covers my first slide, which is what this is about. I'm going to talk to you all about positioning your time abroad to get a job. So we'll talk about the context of an interview, your CV or resume, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit more about long-term life goals as far as travel and working abroad goes. This is me. My name is Claire Gunter, and as Alexandra said, I graduated from Brandeis in 2003. I have a BA in Fine Arts, and I now run technical implementation and distribution channels at Zendesk in Latin America. It's been a pretty interesting road from graduation to now. I think that a lot of what I learned along the way and continue to learn can help you guys if you're looking to live and work abroad or get a job where international travel plays a big part. As far as my travel and work history goes, mine started my senior year in high school, where I spent a year abroad in Spain through AFS. So I know that many of you have studied abroad or are planning to study abroad through your universities. I kind of jumped the shark and went a year early. And that was my first time leaving the US, and I had actually rarely left my hometown of Dallas, Texas. I was placed in Alicante, so for anyone who's familiar with Spain, that's kind of south of Valencia on the Mediterranean coast. And then I went to Brandeis from there. I did not study abroad at Brandeis, though I did study French and a semester of Chinese. And after earning my BA in Fine Arts, I worked in Boston for a year as a receptionist at a beauty salon. I did not find work in a gallery, which was my kind of leaving college goal. And I was really shocked that I did not actually get that goal, even though in retrospect, I should not have been that surprised. And from there, I went to the University of Barcelona to get a master's degree in business and ended up staying and working for a few years on a work study visa in Barcelona. Moved to San Francisco in 2008 with the guy who is now my husband. It took me a while to find my way into tech and software, but I did in 2011 when I started at Zendesk. We were a very small company then, had about 40 employees in one office in San Francisco. We are now a public company with 13 offices worldwide and over 1,500 employees. So it's been a super interesting development for me career-wise, and specifically being with this company has given me a lot of insight into watching companies grow and how people transfer internationally between companies. So going in here, again, like kind of a little more about my international experience. I speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, Catalan, and French. Countries that I have lived in are the US, Spain, Morocco, and Brazil. Jobs that I have had since college are beauty salon receptionist, publication specialist, translator and interpreter, which I did as a freelance through my own company that I founded, ad sales, support agent, account executive, and business development manager. So if you have any kind of questions about, like, you know, what does the career path look like, it can be pretty rocky, and it certainly is not a straight shot.
Claire, I just want to mention to you
Sure.
that I'm still on your title slide. That is what I'm seeing currently.
Huh.
Your life lesson slide.
That's weird. Let's see. Can you, are you, let's see.
I see your
okay, so that's
face
me
now. Yes.
Okay, well, there you go. So I was totally showing my face during that entire description of what I did. And then here's kind of the text of my international experience. And then, thank you for letting me know, Alexandra. And then moving on, just for what I do now, I travel a lot for work and fun. This is me in my quote unquote window seat. So usually when it's for work, I travel mostly for work, and that's just me. And just so in case you think work travel is like this elegant, amazing thing, you need to remember that most companies actually do not book you into business class, particularly if you are an individual contributor or non-manager. So it's not very glamorous, but I do still love it. And in the last year, I have been to Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and Chile. Again, my job focuses on Latin America, so that's my region. I travel a lot for work and fun. So when I travel for fun, sometimes I take my kid. He's not old enough, as you can see, to take on work trips, but if I'm still traveling, which I plan to be when he's old enough to come around on his own, then I definitely will. I have a lot of great mentors for that. My sister-in-law has 3 teenage children, or I guess teenage sons, and she takes them all pretty much around the world. She's from Australia, and they go kind of all over the place with her for work and pleasure. And then as a family, we vacation. Last year, we got to go to Spain and France. This is our sweet, sweet business class experience heading home from Paris, where I sat near Kim Basinger, which I thought was pretty fun. And we went to Mexico over Christmas. So for work, I travel up to 15 days a quarter. That limit is based on my family. Before I had a child, I traveled more than that. And I would happily continue to travel if I didn't have like a family, a kid, and like all this stuff going on. But it is still like very doable to do 15 days a quarter, which actually comes out to be 2 months a year for work travel, which is a lot, you know. Part of that travel, particularly before I had a kid, was I used to spend a lot of time in Brazil, and I used to kind of go there for months at a time, and it was really cool. I got to sort of build a life there. I have friends there, and I opened our Brazil office, and so it was a really interesting time where I actually got to, by spending long stretches there, spend weekends there, really get to know Brazilian culture. I was based in Sao Paulo, didn't really get out of the city that much, but I did get to go to Rio and Guarujá, which is a beach town. So there was a lot to do there, and it reminded me a lot of studying abroad. So that's sort of about me, what I do. And now we are going to get into you guys. So my question is the poll that Alexandra is going to present, which is, why did you study abroad?
All right, so the poll is up on your screen now. So if you just take 1 second to let us know the reasons why you studied abroad. Was it to acquire language skills, experience another culture, go back to your roots, just experience change in general, or something else? And if it's something else, you can type it into the little question box, and I can share that with Claire as well. So just a couple more seconds to weigh in. We want to hear from you. And then we'll share the results with all of you. All right, Claire. So the majority of folks have voted. So it looks like about 3/4 of people went to experience another culture, 64% to experience change, about a third to get some language skills, and then there are some other reasons. So again, feel free to share them through the question box or not. So back to you.
Cool, thanks. So it's interesting that no one said return to their roots, because that actually comes up later on in the presentation. But my questions to you are, number 1, did you achieve these goals? And number 2 is, how do you talk about that today? So conversations that you have now about your experience abroad are going to shape how you talk about your experience abroad in interviews and professional settings. So the reason I'm asking this is I want you to start thinking about your experience and what it brings to your resume, and how you can work that into how you speak about your time abroad, right? Like, regardless of what your goals were before you left, you are further along than if you had not studied abroad. So if you haven't hit those goals, like, don't worry about it. Or if you like personally feel like you haven't hit it, maybe in the grand scheme of things, other people would look at it and say you did. But either way, having gone does put you further down that path. And even if you do feel like you're coming up short, particularly those who identified language acquisition, if you didn't learn as much language as you thought you should, you know, just rethink that and focus on where you are now, how you want your professional life to continue to move forward, and, you know, where like maybe language acquisition is going to be part of your professional life. Anecdote in here, I actually learned Portuguese at Zendesk, so I did not speak Portuguese before I started here, and now I speak Portuguese like 50% of the time in my job. So now we're going to talk about study abroad and the resume cover letter. Before I go on, have any questions come up, Alexandra?
Nope, not yet, but that is just a
Okay.
reminder, folks, if you have questions throughout the presentation, just submit them and we will get to as many as we can.
Yeah, so I'll be asking for questions pretty much at all of these dividers, just so everybody knows. So talking about resumes, just so that you know what a resume should be, and this isn't coming from like someone who's just Googled what resumes should look like. I've been in the hiring position now for quite a while, and I've gone through a lot of resumes and worked with our recruiters. So this is definitely me speaking from personal experience and also other people who are hiring within my company and friends of mine who hire, right? So first of all, easy to read. You want it to be uncluttered, use clear language, single font, well organized, right? Like this is not an art project. We don't want a lot of colors. Like you want the content to speak for itself. As far as being more informative than inspirational, one thing that we see, particularly with new grads, is people who skew their resume towards things that they haven't done but think that they have the potential to do as opposed to what they have done. So what I'm saying here is that you need to remember that you're telling people what you've done for the last few years, and it's possible that there's not a lot of content because for the last few years you've been in school, right? That's totally fine. Take what content you do have, present it in a way that is understandable, and instead of taking it and turning it into something that is like amazing, different, or aspirational, right? Like you really do need to let people know where you're coming from in a clear and concise way. As far as it being completely true, do not lie. You will never recover from a lie on a resume, okay? And as far as relevant to where you are now and where you are going, again, to date, you might not have a lot of relevant experience, and that is where studying abroad can be a real draw. It shows that you're comfortable trying new things, that you like a new challenge, you're able to learn in the same way that working in retail and waiting tables shows that you have experience dealing with the public, right? So sometimes you do have to draw those connections for people. Like, for example, saying like I studied abroad, right? That doesn't really mean anything, but saying that like you spent time in Paris or, wherever you spent time, and that while you were there, you like tried a lot of new things. Maybe you went to culinary school in Paris, maybe you worked on student law in Chile, whatever you did, right? It just shows that you're comfortable in new environments and able to take on new challenges. Now, as far as a cover letter, first of all, completely tailored to the job to which you are applying. I cannot stress this enough. We can always tell when you just did a find and replace. And I can tell you that one cover letter is not going to be the right cover letter for another job, right? So every single job description that you see out there will tell you what a company is looking for. And then it's your job to prove that the answer to that question is you, right? So take your time, tailor the cover letter to that specific position using language from their posting, which proves that you read it and that you understood what it is that they're looking for, and also position it so that they understand why the job is attractive to you, right? Now, why it's attractive to you is kind of a scary one, because a lot of people, particularly people who've studied abroad and want to keep up their international connections, a lot of times they call out something that's like a basic skill. And I'll give you an example. I've hired before for support people in Portuguese and Spanish, and the resumes that we get from native speakers or from people who have experience in the support world focus on their desire to help people, their desire to learn technical skills and things like that. Whereas when we get a resume from someone who hasn't worked in support and who isn't a native speaker, a lot of times they say that what they really want to do is maintain their language ability, right? And saying that a job is attractive because it maintains your language ability isn't really, like, that's not going beyond what the description is, right? Like, it would be much more interesting to say, like, I already have this language ability and I want to learn a technical skill, which is why I want to work in technical support in that language, right? As far as it being relevant to the task and company at hand, again, like this goes back to not copying and pasting. If you've done some awesome stuff at Brandeis or whatever school you're at, or while you were abroad, that in and of itself isn't necessarily relevant. What you need to do is put it in the context of the job for which you are applying. So you can explain whatever you did in the context of the job, right? So taking the example again of like a tech support role in Spanish, like let's say that you while you studied abroad in Spain did like took a computer science class, right? And that might show that, you know, taking a computer science class in and of itself isn't that interesting, but the fact that you have a really wide technical vocabulary in Spanish is going to be really great for a tech position, right? As far as it being self-explanatory, you know, just don't make people guess about why it is that you're applying to a job. And so basically, whatever you say in your cover letter needs to explain like why specifically you are the right person for this job and this company, right? I mean, it's a tough task. Cover letters should be short and concise, but they also need to carry that over. And then as far as a cover letter being proof that you make sense in the context of the job, this basically just ties everything together, but this is also a good reality check for you as an applicant. So a lot of new grads, what they do is they apply for a job that is out of their reach because they believe in themselves, like they see that it requires 4 years of marketing experience, but you did a marketing internship for a semester and you feel like it's definitely prepared you. I'm not saying don't always be reaching for the next challenge, but because you should believe in yourself and your capabilities, but don't do that to your detriment. Take your experience, apply it to the job description, show that it makes sense. And if you cannot make it make sense to you, it definitely won't make sense to that job. So move on to the next one, right? Because you want to try to get these out there. And, you know, we're not really going to talk a lot about networking right now, but networking does fall into it. If you're kind of coming in with no inside support, like you don't know anyone at the company and you're an unknown, then this is even more important, right? So now moving into where your time abroad fits in. So first of all, languages, if you speak them, that's a skill that you should have under your skills section, right? A skills section is something that you can actually have like it's not really tangible, but I guess it's a real assessment of skills that you have that might apply to the job or might be interesting to the company, right? So languages are a skill. Knowing, you know, programming languages, if you know any type of technology, for example, if you're certified in like some kind of Microsoft thing or whatever, put that in there because it does show an affinity to a certain, you know, affinity to tech, affinity to languages. And it also makes you more interesting because maybe they have this position open in English, but they're thinking about hiring someone for Canada and they need French, right? Something like that. As far as it being site specific, if you did anything in your host country that you could only do there, then you could totally work that in. So like volunteering for students' rights in Chile and you're applying to a law nonprofit, awesome. Did you intern at the Sistine Chapel and now you want to work in museum education? That is perfect. So if it makes sense, then use it. If it doesn't, you can leave it out. You can always get to it in the interview, right? You can also include study abroad as a line item. Your experience might just end up being a line item, but that line item might be what sets you apart from other candidates, which is totally fine. And then as far as it being proof to the affinity of as proof of an affinity to a company, like let's say you studied abroad in France and now you're applying to a French company in the US, that explains why you might be more interested or more interesting to them, right? Another anecdote, I work for a company that is based in the US but is originally from Denmark. I don't have any experience in Denmark. I did work for a very short time in Norway as a dairymaid, and I didn't put that on my resume, but when I was talking to one of the founders who originally interviewed me, he asked me something about kind of Scandinavia in general, and I said, oh, well, I worked in Norway as a dairymaid, and just that one thing like really made him think like, oh, look at her, she's kind of like gotten around. Again, I never thought that being a dairymaid was going to do anything for me other than help me understand cheese better, but there you go. So now we're going to work into study abroad and the interview, but I wanted to pause because there usually are questions surrounding the CV, resume, and cover letter part.
Yeah,
so if
absolutely.
anyone has those.
So far I have two questions here, one on cover letters and one on resumes. So the cover letter one is, do you read cover letters? So you said you do a lot of hiring and you had tips for cover letters. I know some recruiters just kind of spend a couple seconds on each resume and then let it slide. Do you read cover letters?
So I know that my recruiters do skim the cover letters, like they don't read every single one. Also, just to be fair to them, when I started at Zendesk, in 2011, there were 40 people in one office. And again, now we have over 1,500 in 13 offices. So they've gone through hundreds of thousands of resumes and cover letters. A lot of times what I do with the cover letters when I get a position, so a candidate's already been vetted for the job, and it's like someone who I'm either going to be interviewing or who I'm considering to interview, I read the cover letter after I read the resume. So I go through the resume and I see if the resume makes sense to me, want to understand kind of why my recruiter sent that person through. And then I take a look at the cover letter to see if the cover letter supports what they state in their resume, or if the cover letter is just kind of like a more, I guess, literary account of their resume, right? And so that gives me a better kind of insight into their personality and what they're looking for. So yeah, the short answer is yes, I do. But remember, I read far fewer cover letters than our recruiters do.
Got it. The other two more questions here.
Sure.
Where on your resume would you put your study abroad experience? So obviously, a lot of times students think about it as part of their education, but are there other options?
Yeah. So going into here where it says like, where does the time abroad fit in? Putting in study abroad as part of your education is great. Also, it can work its way in under skills as languages, or it can work its way in under professional experience if you did an internship. Like I, for example, was a publications intern in Barcelona, and for a very long time, that was under my professional experience because it was part of my program, right? So I would say that it kind of works its way in subtly throughout your resume, skills, any professional experience you have there, and education.
Yep. Great. Other question specifically about a type of experience. So this student conducted research in an independent research class. Is that something that they could be including on their resume? The research was done abroad, but it might not be directly related to the job.
Yeah, I mean, being able to do research is probably helpful to like everything ever, right? Just to be very clear, like knowing how to do research, knowing how to accept information, parse it, and get it out there. It would be great if that research was ever published or used in a publication, that you could cite that publication. Some of you who are coming from, 4 years of academia might have publications under your belt, and you'll want to include those in your resume. Or as part of, if it was an independent research class, like when I hear independent research class, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? So you might want to have that under like projects. If you have a project section, a lot of people I see, because I'm in tech, a lot of project sections under resumes, because people show me their GitHub, or they show me like any type of like tech nonprofit that they've been working on, or an open source project. So that could go under projects. It really depends on kind of what you were researching and why. So without further information, it's hard for me to say, but I would say like, don't work it into your detriment. Like if it's important that people know that you're able to do research and show results to that, then you can figure out a way to do that in your cover letter. Or if that's a job requirement, like if you're applying to a think tank, if you're applying to like a business intelligence position or something like that, then you'll want to highlight that in the cover letter as like, this is what I did that proves that I know what I'm doing in like the most basic sense, right?
Great. Last quick question. What makes resumes and cover letters stand out most to you? So obviously you're in a distinct field, you're in tech recruiting.
Yeah.
But have there been certain things over the years that have really made something stand out of the pile that you're like, this person did a great job with that?
Yeah, outside of a network connection where like someone actually says to me like so and so sent their resume to this company and you should totally pay attention to them, which is obviously like the biggest endorsement. If I see a resume that genuinely, like if I can look at it for less than a minute and know that this person is in fact a good candidate for the job that I've got, that really resonates with me. Like if I'm having to piece things together and you give me a puzzle instead of a picture, I am not going to put the puzzle together, right? And so that for me is just what stands out, is if I take, 45 seconds to look at a resume and I'm like, wow, this person is like a great fit, that's what's most impressive to me.
Great. So using headings to your benefit and making it tailored to your point exactly for the job at hand.
Right. Right. Like if I see a resume that gives me enough information to think like, wow, this person really does have a great portfolio of experience for this position, then I will absolutely flip onto the cover letter, right? And see like a little bit more about them, how they operate and everything that like just who they are, right?
Great. Thank you. On to the interview.
Yeah. For sure. So now we're going to talk about study abroad in the interview. And just one thing I want you guys to remember is what I said earlier, which is how you talk about studying abroad now is going to affect how you talk about study abroad in the interview. Because when you're in an interview, particularly if you're nervous, you're going to kind of fall back. So just start thinking about how you talk about study abroad. So here we go. Like, first of all, when do you bring up your time abroad in an interview? And so if your resume or cover letter was compelling enough to get you a conversation or an interview, and also like for those of you who haven't been through like the interview process, your first quote unquote interview is usually over the phone with a recruiter, right? And they're going to talk through the paperwork that you sent them, right? And they'll probably bring up each point of your resume, right? So you can just wait until they bring it up. And you know, when they bring it up, they might say like, oh, and you know, I read about this research project, tell me more, right? Which is another reason why you don't have to detail your research project in the cover letter. You need to detail why the research project made you right for this job. And then in the conversation, that's where you give them the detail, right? But you can also bring it up if it makes sense. Like if they ask you a question and the answer to that question is supported by the time you spend abroad, then definitely bring that up. So I have an example, which is that let's say that you've been asked about your ability to wear many hats, and you say that you have hands-on experience from when you were living in Madrid and you juggled an internship at a finance firm and carried a full course load while learning Spanish, right? Like those are three pretty challenging things that you balanced at the same time and were clearly successful in doing so, right? So that actually is a really great way to illustrate the point of that you are ready to wear many hats, right? Many hats is kind of a pet phrase in the tech industry. I try not to use it, but it does come up in interviews. And then again, like if it adds to what you're saying, so don't be gratuitous. Like if you just want to mention your time abroad and it doesn't make sense, it just makes you look like you're trying to bring up the fact that you've traveled, which can come across as kind of pretentious. And so for me, like studying abroad for a lot of people, I mean, not a lot of people get that opportunity. So for those of you on the call who have studied abroad or are going to study abroad, you know, congratulations. Like that's a big deal. Not a lot of people get to do it, particularly in the US, right? But it's not necessarily what makes you special in the context of a job or an interview. And in fact, like I mentioned the trying to hire a support agent before, but an anecdote that I have about study abroad is that we had a bunch of resumes of people who spoke Portuguese, right? And you know, asking people like, why do you want this job? Everyone who wasn't a native Portuguese speaker or who hadn't lived there for an extended amount of time, by there I mean Brazil, they would say like, oh, well, I really want to keep up my Portuguese. And to give you an idea of what that sounded like to me, saying that you are taking a foreign language tech support position in order to maintain your language is like applying to a journalist position because you know how to type, right? Like that doesn't give me any context to the quality of your journalism, your research skills, your curiosity. It just tells me that you know how to type, which is not, like that is a bare minimum for the job, right? So for that, like bringing up time abroad and language skills is obviously if it makes sense, but it's not necessarily what sets you apart, particularly when you're applying for a language position, right? So remember that you are there to talk about the position you're applying to, so always make that the focus. Like, excuse me, a lot of people go into an interview and they, you know, talk about themselves, and you're asked to talk about yourself and you should talk about yourself, but remember that you're talking about yourself in a little bit of a future tense because you're talking about yourself in the context of this position that you're applying to. So just always keep that in mind when you're doing the interviews. Those are all of my interview slides, by the way, because we're going to move on to the goal side of kind of travel and working abroad. So does anyone have any interview questions? This one is also where I get a lot of questions.
Yeah, so none right now, but I'm sure they'll continue to come in.
Okay. So we're going to move on from kind of you've submitted a cover letter, you submitted a resume, and you're looking for a position that is maybe international, or you're just looking to leverage study abroad as a differentiator in your jobs. Awesome. Now we're moving into goals. So this presentation is sort of shifting from positioning your time abroad to get a job to what working abroad or travel as part of your job looks like in your larger context, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is define your goals and figure out where travel and working abroad fit into them. The first thing we're going to talk about are short-term goals. So short-term goals, when I say that they're based on where you are now, right now we're looking at, most of you have or will have very soon a college degree, probably not a lot of working experience, but a proven ability to learn and a need to make money. I'm making the assumption that everybody on here is going to need to make money when they graduate from college. I know that that's not everybody's case, but that was mine. So we're just going to blanket apply that, right? Short-term goals require little to no planning. So this is something that you can do without a lot of prep or further study. So think about where you are now and what that adds up to in the professional context, right? The answer to that professionally is an entry-level position, which is a good thing. Like, you have to start somewhere, and do not be afraid of entry-level positions. Like, everybody has to do them. They are fundamental in your development for understanding how the workplace functions, understanding people when you actually get to a higher level and being able to manage those people. So like entry level, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want this like dead end job, whatever. Not all entry level positions are dead end. I'm a huge fan of the entry level positions, right? And then as far as obtainable in the near future, when I say the near future, I'm speaking about within a year, right? And these goals can be driven by a combination of need and your long-term goals, right? So by need, like, I mean, for example, I was a receptionist at a beauty salon. I needed to make money, and that job gave me that. And along with that, it wasn't a job that I took home with me, so it did give me a lot of options to do any freelance work or study and kind of not have to deal with my job outside of hours, right? And then as far as the short-term goals shaping your long-term goals, this is more of I mean, yes, you can plan your short-term goals in the context of your long-term goals, but your short-term goals are actually going to shape your long-term goals, right? So these experiences, how you enjoy them, what they open up for you, all of that's going to help you understand what you actually want in the long term. That, don't be afraid if that changes, right? Like, I honestly thought that I was going to spend the rest of my life in Barcelona. I was perfectly happy to do that. And, like, that didn't happen. And I am absolutely thrilled that it didn't, for many reasons. I still go back and visit Barcelona. It's one of my favorite places, but that goal changed, right? So then we're going to talk about long-term goals, okay? Long-term goals require time and planning, so you might need more education, a combination of experience or skills, or something that you don't currently have. Like, a long-term goal right now would be, I want to become a lawyer, right? In order to do that, you're going to need a law degree, right? So that's what makes it a long-term goal. Once you get out of law school, your short-term goal might be to become a lawyer, and your long-term goal might be to found your own practice. Your long-term goal might be to, become an in-house lawyer in the tech industry. Whatever, you have like a different goal, right? So kind of long shift to short. Long-term goals are several years away. So I would think about those in terms of, in 5 years, in 10 years, I want to, or in 20 years, I hope to have ... right? As far as them being related to anything, we can be talking about education, income, titles, skills, family, whatever gives you something to work towards that you can feel proud of. Like, that's a long-term goal, right? And these can change over time based on experience, right? So your experiences are going to shape your future as much as your ambition or dreams. So keep an open mind and be ready to change course if you find out through experience that whatever your goal was is not right for you. Drawing on personal experience, there was definitely a time when I thought that I was going to be a lawyer, and I opted not to be a lawyer. A big reason was it actually wasn't going to let me travel, right? Like, when you get a law degree, in some places, or like when you pass the bar, in some places that limits you to a specific state in the United States. If you get a law degree in the US, like, practicing law abroad basically doesn't exist. And so I realized that even though law to me is interesting, and I still follow a lot of policy and kind of legal themes in my own just personal reading, it was not going to be something that I wanted to dedicate myself to professionally, because it just wasn't gonna work for me from like a personal goal perspective, right? So we're moving into the next and last poll, which is travel for work or living and working abroad a long-term goal or a short-term goal for you? So this will be pretty quick.
So quick poll up on your screen now. Are you thinking about working and or living abroad a short-term goal or a long-term goal, or are you not sure yet, still trying to figure it out, which is totally fine. Now is the time to explore. Give you a couple more seconds to weigh in and show you that you are in good company. So Claire, it looks like about half of folks, it's a short-term goal, something they maybe want to be doing right after graduation. 14% long-term, about a third not quite sure yet.
Okay, cool. That's kind of funny because I sort of, so for this one, I kind of did tailor the presentation to travel as a long-term professional goal because that's where I'm coming from. However, it's funny that most of you are interested in this as a short-term goal. Again, short-term goals can influence your long-term goals, so stay on the line. I think this is still going to be relevant. But just talking about like short-term goals for me is, you know, maybe when you graduate, you've decided that you want to like go teach English abroad, you know, or you want to return to where you studied abroad to get more training. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can make this a short-term goal, right? Like for me, I studied abroad in Spain in high school, did not study abroad in college, but I did return to Spain every summer to work. And then I got my master's degree at the University of Barcelona, which would have been fulfilling the short-term goal of living abroad. And I was also working abroad. I had a work-study visa, which we can get into later. But, you know, if depending on what you're looking to do, like kind of the hard thing about traveling right after college is when you travel, a lot of people decide like kind of, oh, I'm going to go teach English abroad, right? Like that is the most common way to travel, unless you're actually able to take like a gap year where you just actually travel and maybe don't earn money, right? So the thing that you need to remember always is that what sets you apart are your skills, right? Like you may be a really nice person, a really funny person, a really ambitious person. There's a million positive things that you can be, but what you can do is your differentiator, right? So teaching English abroad is great experience if you want to be a teacher, right? But if what you want to do is go into business, then maybe you should be developing some other skills while you're abroad, right? Oh wait, before we go into working abroad, are there any questions coming up, Alexandra?
There are a couple questions, but they're a little bit more general, so I think we can wait until the end for these ones.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so working abroad, what you need to think about, and this is for short-term and long-term, can you legally work outside the US? So that's a question that I ask everybody. Visas do not grow on trees. So if you have a passport or a way to get a passport or a visa based on current law, you should use that, right? I have a lot of experience with getting visas for abroad, and I'm also married to an immigrant. My husband is from Australia, and he's currently on a green card, but when we moved to the US, he was on a visa that was specific for Australians in the US, right? So, and I think legalities are really important. I know plenty of people who have just kind of gone abroad and not had the paperwork or the legal stuff to back them up. I was never comfortable doing that, and I don't recommend it. It limits you a lot professionally, and you do run the risk of like not being able to come back to the country where you're living if you leave, right? So if you have any way to work legally outside of the US, you know, thinking about it, like there's a lot of programs in different countries for people who have grandparents who are from there who are eligible to get a passport, right? Like particularly in Europe, I think that right now, if you have if you have grandparents who were born and raised in the UK, I think you might have access to like a 3-year visa. I know you do if you're Australian. I don't know for the US, but there's a lot of different things. So take a look at the countries that you're interested in and see if there's any way that you could get over there legally, because that's kind of like the best way to go, right? Another question is, do you have any special skills that set you apart in your target market, right? The reason I'm asking this is that most countries have rules about importing workers, and they must be specialized. So that means that no one who's already living in the country or is a citizen of that country can do that job, right? Oftentimes these are science related. I'm sensitive that I'm talking to a liberal arts group. So I want you to know that you can find these options in the humanities depending on location and specialization, right? And I'm thinking about like linguists who work at the UN or philosophers who get hired in think tanks. So if you have an idea of where you want to work, then you can take a look at kind of options that might fit for you, or you can take a look at the skills that you have and see if those are needed anywhere in the world, right? And so I think there's multiple ways to approach it to figure out where you can go, right? And that kind of feeds into the question, do you have a goal place where you want to work, right? A lot of you said that you wanted to go to study abroad to experience change. A lot of people after they study abroad want to go back to that place, but are you open to maybe going to a different place and experience change again, right? I mean, a really common one that I see is people who studied abroad in Spain, but then they end up working somewhere in Latin America. So the Spanish is still relevant and they have, you know, a good linguistic background for that, but culturally it's totally different, you know? But whatever you want to do is if you have a goal place, learn as much as you can about that place, figure out how you can get there legally. And again, like you can reverse engineer that by researching places that are open to having people like you. And then another question I have, and this is like the question that no one wants to hear when they've just graduated from college, which is how much are you willing to pay for this experience? I'm not trolling you. I'm not asking you that. Because I want you to like be afraid how much it's going to cost, but you do need to think about how much you're willing to pay for this experience from a perspective of doing paperwork, visa, legalities, and stuff like that. Try to understand that up front, because you want to be able to have the money to do the entire process and actually do the move, right? So another kind of me experience, I got my master's degree from the University of Barcelona. A big reason why I chose the University of Barcelona beyond the actual program was the cost. UB was way less expensive than NYU, where I also got in. Part of my master's degree was an internship. And I knew that if I did the University of Barcelona, you know, the student visa was a question of like hundreds of dollars, not thousands, which was great. Beyond the cost of the student visa, I had to buy my ticket, you know, to get there and pay for the program. And looking at like my finances at the time and like how I had things set up, I was going to be able to do that without taking out any extra loans, as long as I did it on like a payment plan, right? And then, so I went over there, I did that, I got an internship, and then at my internship, I had an amazing time. I worked in the publications section of a public institution that will remain unnamed. I got a job offer, which blew my mind because it was basically fulfilling my desire to live in Barcelona and work. And then it turned out that because it was a public entity and publicly funded, they were not allowed to process a visa for anyone outside of the European Union, right? So that's where I say that like visas don't grow on trees, right? Like I had an actual job offer and I accepted and we were going through it, and then the paperwork was actually blocked because of the entity, right? That was a huge bummer. I was really sad about it. But it didn't deter me, right? So I decided to figure out, okay, what other like means of getting there can I figure out, right? And I already had, I was already doing some translation freelance. So what I ended up doing is kind of incorporating in the US as a translator with my own company. And then I found out that you can process a work study visa. And so a work study visa is where if you are studying in Spain, I mean, this was at the time, I'm not sure if this is current, if you were studying, you could work part-time legally in Spain, which was a huge deal, right? So what I found was a study program that I could afford. I was living in I wanted to live in Barcelona, and the study program that I could afford was actually my Catalan certification. I didn't necessarily need Catalan. I now think that studying Catalan was one of the greatest things I did because it opened up a whole new world for me. But at the time, like that's a pretty kind of out there skill to have, right? But I was already translating, and so I ended up, getting my Catalan certification, which gave me the right to be in Barcelona legally and work part-time. So I took a part-time job at a startup, which was wonderful. I mean, for a while I was doing ad sales and I was working at a startup. And I was also always doing this freelance translation through my own company. So that was how I was able to make ends meet. It was also how I was able to kind of take some time off and go work in Morocco. Because I was a freelance translator, you can kind of do that wherever there's an internet connection. So I lived in a place in Morocco that had internet and really enjoyed that. And then I kept doing that, and I was really happy. I was in my mid-20s, and that's a great time to be in Barcelona. But ultimately, I was getting to the point where I was kind of done with all the Catalan. I really couldn't go through the student visa process again. And that was when I happened to meet, well, about a year before that, I met the man who's now my husband, and he is Australian, and he was really interested in moving to an English-speaking country because he did not speak Spanish. And so what we ended up doing was making a list of cities where we were both willing to live. And then we applied for jobs in those cities, and sort of whoever got the visa first decided where we were going. And it just so happens that he's a programmer, and we got a visa and ended up coming to live in San Francisco, right? So I've certainly let like visas and legalities dictate where I end up, and it's gone really well for me. So I very much support that decision. But that's sort of what working abroad can look like sometimes, is you are limited by the time that you spend, like you're limited by whatever law you're working under, right? So then how to get a job abroad? A lot of people ask me like, well, how did you find this, So first of all, you want to find companies that have operations where you want to go. So, and why do you want to do that? Transferring employees between offices is usually a lot easier for companies. And it makes a lot more sense. Like I have tons of friends from the UK who've transferred to the US office. I have American friends who are working in the UK. I say the UK a lot because they speak English there. And so a lot of my friends have transferred English to English, but I do have colleagues, I have Brazilian colleagues who work here in our US office. I have Brazilian colleagues who work in our Dublin office, right? So it's kind of all over the place. And that's another reason why I say try to work at HQ being headquarters. Employees in headquarters do tend to have access to more opportunities for transferring into satellite offices just because they have higher visibility and more plentiful resources. As far as presenting relocation as an option you would consider, like walking into an interview for a job that is based in the US and saying that you don't want to live in the US is you literally saying that you don't want that job, right? But like walking in, and if they come up and they say, oh, this is a job that's based in San Francisco, however, we're looking for someone who is, interested in maybe spending a stint in X location, like say that you're interested in that, right? You don't, and also if it's not the location of your dreams, but it's still a relocation, consider that. Like if you eventually want to end up in Paris and someone's offering you to do a stint in Montpellier for a year, go to Montpellier for the year. That puts you a lot closer to Paris. That gives you a lot more working experience in the country, and that might actually get you to where you're going, right? Be good at your job. Good employees are the ones who get sent abroad. Many companies actually have policies that an employee cannot be transferred unless they're in good standing in their current position, right? So there's a lot of people that want to be relocated. So differentiating yourself, not by wanting to be relocated, but being good enough at your job that they want to put your face someplace else is a really, really great strategy, a very sound strategy, right? And then another thing is that if you're at a company that has operations where you want to go, like see if you can work remotely at the target office for some time, right? You can test it out, see how it goes. Maybe you love it, maybe you hate it, right? Like you have no idea. I have gotten to work from our Sao Paulo offices. See, I've worked in Sao Paulo and in London and in Melbourne. And it's really interesting to see what the offices look like and just understand more about that. Other than Sao Paulo, all of the offices that I've worked from have been on my own dime. So I've been going abroad. Like I went to Barcelona for a week on vacation, and then I stayed in London for a week and worked remotely, right, from our London office. Melbourne, my husband's from Melbourne, and so we've been there and I've gone into the office there, right? So those are just like options that you have for kind of testing things out. And then if you want a travel heavy jobs are very different from working abroad. You can also be working abroad and have a travel heavy job. I currently have a travel heavy job, and usually those are, you get those through a combination of skills and linguistic or cultural fluency. So maybe your company has a lot of salespeople and maybe it has quite a few employees that speak Spanish, but how many Spanish speaking salespeople do they have? Right? Like when you start parsing it like that, you realize that there's like one person and it might be you, right? Being flexible and willing. If you have like X opportunity, but it means that someone is going to have to visit Singapore 5 times a year, that might be a good opportunity for you. Maybe you don't know anything about Singapore and you didn't know, like, you're not sure, but this is your chance to say like, yeah, I'll take that opportunity and I'll visit Singapore 5 times this quarter, right? And then apply for those travel heavy jobs, right? Like if you see a job where it says, 25, 30, 50% travel, apply for it, because that does deter some people. For example, again, I travel 15 days a quarter, which is a lot, but I would never apply for a job that said 50% travel because like I personally, my family could not handle that right now. Right. So, and remember that when you apply for those jobs, companies really do have to trust you if you're going to travel in their name. So you don't necessarily have to have the professional experience, or if you don't have the professional experience, explain how you got relevant experience while studying abroad and that you're able to represent yourself respectfully and with integrity while abroad, right? And then also know your limits, right? Like right now, most of you are probably young, unattached, and eager to get out there, and that is awesome. But if you see that travel is hurting you in some way, like for example, you're traveling 50% of the time, makes it unable for you to meet people, you are physically and emotionally debilitated, you're unable to keep up with your job, or if your life situation changes, you meet someone, you have a kid, whatever, be ready for your job or career to change with it, right? So again, this is an adjustment of your long-term goals. And then, now I've got this for questions. I know that we had some general questions and we have about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to try to power through them and see what's good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. Lots of information there and so relevant when you share your own personal anecdotes as well. So, couple questions. The first is, you had mentioned looking for a country that needs your particular skills may provide a visa or a legal work option. How would one go about looking for those sorts of opportunities?
So first of all, it depends on what your skills are. And when I say skills, like I don't mean that you think you'd be really good at marketing. I mean that you have like demonstrated in the past that you're good at marketing, that you're good at research, that you're whatever. And understanding, like keeping up on the news of that country. And I'll give you a great example, which is actually the US. A lot of people know that the US is in need of tech talent, right? Particularly out in the Silicon Valley. Why? Because there's a lot of tech companies there. So a lot of engineers apply for jobs in the Silicon Valley. They do it for the prestige, but they also do it because they know that there's options to do that, right? You have people who, if you hear there's a shortage of healthcare workers and you work in healthcare, that might be enough to get you in, right? If you know that there are, if you've got a nonprofit that specializes in like human rights violation and you did peace and conflict studies, that might send you to where you're going, right? So you need to have, that's why I say kind of like understand your skills and then find out where your skills are needed. Everybody can do something and everybody needs something done for them, right? So figuring that out, again, it might not be your first choice. A lot of people sort of, I don't know, there's mixed reviews about like, do I want to go to the quote unquote third world? I'm a huge fan of traveling anywhere. And so if if you feel like you would be safe enough and there's a need for your skill in, sub-Saharan Africa, if you're looking, into maybe a more depressed part of Latin America, like really consider it. Don't do anything that you don't feel safe doing, but it could be something that could really change your life.
Great, thank you. Speaking of working in the United States, this student has a question about your advice on international students living in the US who speak different languages and have diverse international experience. What is your advice for them for distinguishing their different language and country backgrounds in the job search process?
So that's kind of a tough one because unless your international experience is something that sets you apart from everybody else, you're actually competing with, local people who don't have like some of the maybe challenges that you do, perhaps linguistic or cultural. So again, this is where your skills are really important, and also understanding your ability, like what your legal status is in the United States, right? A lot of companies, if you go on and fill out their application, the question will be like, what is your work status currently in the United States, right? And like be honest there. Like if you don't have an H-1B, then don't put H-1B, right? But what you want to do is make sure that you have these skills plus maybe like the affinity of already having done like something specific to that company here in the States. It really does come down to skills, right? I don't know if differentiating yourself if you are from another country, the fact that you're from another country is already a difference. And so, but I don't know if it's necessarily something that you want to put above your skills, right? Like for me, again, like skills are what gets hired in a job.
Right. And to your point, it's all about what's relevant. So if your internship back in your home country was super relevant to the job that you're applying for, that's great.
Right.
So speaking about experiences, here's another question. If you have limited experience or limited skills that are relevant to the position for which you're applying, but you're very interested, what are your thoughts on expressing extreme interest and demonstrating that you'd work hard despite some underqualification? So kind of those aspirational pieces.
Yeah, again, like I am really loath to recommend that anyone apply for a position where they do not meet the bare minimum criteria, right? And there's a few reasons that I say that. Number one, like it hurts your feelings when they tell you no, right? And a lot of those, it's not that they tell you no, like you don't even get a response, right? Like they see it and they're like, clearly this person didn't read the description and they don't know what they're asking about, right? So that's a really hard thing to get over. My recommendation is if you see a job that you genuinely want at a company, which also job descriptions like are not necessarily like written in stone and true, right? Like, I've applied to jobs and ended up 3 months later doing something totally different, then maybe you can find an entry level position at that company that is going to put you in touch with the people who are working in that section so that you can work up to that, right? And like this happens so much in marketing, which I find really funny. A lot of people just think like, oh, I've seen so many ads, like I'm good at marketing, right? And so people apply. Like marketing is really, it's a skill. It is, it's very difficult. It's a challenging market. It is a competitive market. And we see a lot of people, we like me and my friends, like who are in hiring positions, see a lot of people applying for marketing jobs that have no marketing experience whatsoever, but are really creative, right? Okay, that's great, but like go to a marketing internship where you're really creative and get their recommendation. Like don't shoot for this like huge marketing position that we don't think you're ready for because we're not going to give it to you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think last question that we have time for before we talk about some additional resources. So this student is currently abroad and wants to find volunteer work related to their field. Is there a website or way of going about finding this kind of work abroad that you've found helpful?
So mostly, there's a great, God, what was it in the US? There's a place, it's called, I think, oh my gosh. So there, I mean, looking at any job site, like you can look at, like LinkedIn actually has great nonprofit opportunities, and you can sort, LinkedIn has great sorting options for search. You can also do Indeed. You can look at actual, NGOs that are maybe located in the US and see if they have remote positions. And then I think there's, I can't remember the name, there's a website, um, no, I can't remember the name of it, but I mean, most of my websites that I know of for nonprofits are located in the US. I mean, Kiva is a great resource just because kiva.org has a lot of operations worldwide, and kind of following those links, you will start getting served ads for opportunities that are relevant to those links, because that's how caching works. So just kind of doing searches will get you kind of where you need to go.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. Any
Mhm.
final thoughts for folks looking to fold in their international experience into what's next?
I would just say, good luck, and, shoot for it. Like, you're probably not immediately going to graduate and have land the job of your dreams wherever you're going. And if you do that, like, that's like peaking when you're 16. Like, if you peak when you're 16, you have got decades and decades of disappointment in front of you. So don't peak when you're 16, like peak when you're 50, and really like get in there and enjoy yourself. I cannot recommend enough experience. So get in, know when to fold them, and get out, right? Like when I was a receptionist at a beauty salon, that was a wonderful job for a few months, but like it was very clear that that was not where I wanted to spend my time. I was glad I did it. It paid the rent and it got me where I needed to be, but I was really glad when I got to leave it. And that's an experience like I will never have a job that bad again. And I'm so glad that I had it when I was 23, right? Because I certainly don't want to have that job when I'm 50.
Yep, that
Um,
short-term, long-term goals.
yeah. So there's two more slides that you had added, Alexandra.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got to those, and I forgot about them, so I'm sorry.
Absolutely, no worries. So, students, I wanted to let you know about some specific Hiatt Career Center resources that are actually all accessible from abroad. So, if you are currently studying abroad or if you're back here on campus, you can search international job and internship opportunities in Handshake, which is our recruiting database. Going Global is an awesome resource, also accessible via Handshake for country specific resources. So they have sample resumes and cover letters by country. They have job and internship search resources. They have visa information, all in Going Global, and you can find that in Handshake. Additionally, Claire mentioned talking to people is so important. So you're able to submit a Wisdom Wanted ad, and we send that out to our alumni list of over 1,000 alums ready to help you with career advice. So if you are considering studying abroad or traveling abroad after graduation and you want to talk with other alumni who have done that, consider submitting an ad. The other piece, again, Claire talked about the importance of telling your story and telling your study abroad story properly in an interview. And so a great way to do that is to practice. And so we do offer weekly interview coaching sessions where you can practice with an alumni volunteer. And the last night of those coaching sessions is next Tuesday. So again, you can do it in person or via phone and Skype, depending on where you are currently located in this world. Lastly, I just wanted to leave you with Hiatt Career Center contact information. We have phone and Skype career counseling appointments available as well, and you can schedule those online. And also, you're able to chat with a Hiatt advisor via Google Chat Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 Eastern Time. So, really accessible for those who are studying abroad. You can send in your resume, get it reviewed online. And stay in touch with our office. So thank you so much for all of you joining us today. You'll get the link to the recording later on this afternoon, as well as a link to our international job, internship, and volunteer resources on the Hiatt website, which go into some more specifics about visa requirements by country and some search resources, whether you're looking for full-time work, volunteerism, or internships. So thanks again.
Yep,
Thank you again, Claire, and
absolutely.
happy traveling.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody. And I don't know if you see my face at commencement, because I'm going to be at commencement this year. Because I just got into I'm now on the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Program board. I just got into that. So if any of you are in that program or and want to say hi, come by and say hi.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a
Okay.
great afternoon.